Hello, innovators, and welcome to another episode of the Heitland Show, where I connect the dots of innovation and entrepreneurship with my guests. Today's guest is a very experienced innovation thought leader. He's the founder and CEO of Strategyn, a product strategy and innovation consultancy firm with an exceptional track record of launching some of the fastest growing products in history. And he is the author of the books What Customers Want and The Jobs to Be Done. Tony and I talk deeply about the innovation process and how corporates can build outcome-driven innovation. Please welcome to the show, Tony Ulwick. Hello, Tony. Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Jens, thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it. I'm doing well.
Great. I'm really looking forward. You are one of the most experienced innovators I've had on this podcast. So I'm eager to learn and take a lot of notes, of course. So before we go into the innovation part, I always let the person who I'm interviewing introduce themselves. So tell us a little bit about who you are for those who have never heard about yourself, but as well of how did you get to where you are today? So giving a little bit of journey perspective.
Sure, I'd be happy to start with a little history. I know there's a lot of innovators out there that have probably gone through a similar experience, which is failing at innovation, and that's how I started as well. So I'll start there. I was working for IBM back in the 1980s on a product called the PC Junior, which was supposed to be IBM's entree into the home computer market. And we'd spent a couple of years planning this and getting it ready and creating the manufacturing plant to produce millions of these units because we knew it was going to take over the world, of course. And the day after the product was introduced, the very day after, the headlines in the Wall Street Journal read, "The PC Junior is a flop." And we thought, well, how could that be? That's got to be wrong. Why are they saying this? Well, it took us about a year to reconcile this, but it was a flop. And it was a $1 billion flop, in fact. And it wasn't IBM's only $1 billion flop either. Around the same time frame, they were investing in OS2, a new operating system. They were investing money at a rapid pace, and it failed to produce the desired results. And this is what got me interested in innovation, because I thought, how could a company like that, with all these vast resources, fail in such a grand way? And as it turns out, of course, it's not just them. This happens all the time to many companies. It's the problem with innovation, right? It's unpredictable. So this set me down a path in my last 5 years or so at IBM, working on a product planning team, trying to think of a better way to innovate, or really think about the product planning process. How can we devise products that we know are going to win in the marketplace instead of hope will win in the marketplace? So that led to investigating all sorts of tools. Voice of the customer was getting popular at the time, as well as QFD in the House of Quality and conjoint analysis. But what I quickly realized is that people were trying to cobble together tools that would help people innovate or become better at innovation. And it was really at the early stages of its existence, and there really was no innovation process or tool set that made innovation predictable. So my goal was to create that set of tools. So this has been my motivation for years. And back in 1991, I left IBM to start Strategyn. I started as a company called the Total Quality Group. And the reason I did that is because I was trying to bring total quality management concepts to the innovation space. And from there, we've been evolving the process over years. We've had some great successes with it, and I can bring you all the way up to to the present time, Jens. But I'll stop there and see where you want to go next.
That's awesome. So basically, since 1991, you're an entrepreneur and you have your own business and helping other companies to innovate and other people to innovate.
Yeah, that's exactly right. What we've done is we've created arguably the world's most powerful innovation process, and we help companies use that process and apply it in their organizations to create breakthrough offerings. And we also teach people how to use the process and how to do it themselves so that they can build their own internal innovation capabilities. So like you said, this has been ongoing for the last 30 years or so. I'd say for the first 10 or 15 years, I focused mainly on fine-tuning the process and making sure that it worked across all different industries as opposed to having to fine-tune it each time. So that took a long time. We often joke about this. We say it took us 15, 20 years to perfect the process, and now we have to figure out how to install it in companies as well, which is a different challenge. And that's one that we've been working through for the last 10 years or so as we help companies build this innovation capability.
Yeah, I definitely want to go into that. But before, I would like to start a little bit more high level. So, having one of the amazing innovators in the podcast, I thought asking you a question. So, imagine we two would start writing the innovation lexicon and redefining what needs to be redefined. What are words and things in the innovation ecosystem where you said these are words I would redefine differently and describe that in this lexicon?
Yeah, that is really a great question because, as you know, Jens, a lot of this is just having a common language for innovation.
Mm.
And our research shows that even to this day, there is no common language for innovation. And when you start thinking about the terms, let's start at the beginning. Let's start with innovation. Is there agreement across product teams as to what innovation is?
Mm.
And we know the answer is no. There isn't an agreed on definition of what innovation is, and people conflate innovation with invention. There's just a whole bunch of things that go on. And I won't get into how we define it yet, but that's just one term. A second term is a market. Every company serves markets, but how do you define a market? Companies often define them around the product itself, or a technology, or a use case, or vertical. There's no common language around which we should define a market. Of course, that's problematic. If we can't agree on what a market is, how do we agree on how to best serve a market, right? Mm. And as we follow that logic, the next step is customer needs. We know that, it's pretty obvious, that the way to succeed at innovation is to better satisfy customers' needs. Nobody would argue with that. But our data shows that 90% of product teams disagree on what a customer need even is. Again, this is a language of innovation issue. Do they define a need around a feature, a product? Is it around as an exciter or a delighter? Is it latent? Is it articulated? Is it a specification, a requirement? I could go on, right? But there is no agreed on definition of what a need is. And I find this amazing because we did some work 10, 15 years back where we looked at the top voice of the customer practitioners in the US. And I think we looked at 15 of them and asked them, how do they define customer needs? Well, not surprising, we had 15 different answers. And I think that's the heart of the problem, right? If we can't agree on what a customer need is, then how are we going to agree what the needs are and which needs are unmet? And how are we going to agree if there's segments of people with different unmet needs, right? And the answer is we can't. So that's an obvious problem. I think another term that's interesting is the term segment, a market segment. How do you define a market segment? Is it around a vertical? Is it around a demographic, a psychographic classification scheme, some attitudes, behaviors? There's no agreed on best way to define a segment. Now, what I find interesting about this is I think everyone agrees on why we're trying to segment, right? We're trying to segment markets so we can find groups of people with different unmet needs, right? And companies will often use proxies to do this, like I said, demographics, psychographics, and so on. And the reason they don't do it straightforward and segment around customer needs directly is because there's no agreement what a need is. So, companies are stuck in this circular loop, if you will, a recursive loop where we're all trying to come up with solutions that address unmet needs through the innovation process, but we don't agree on what the innovation process is. We don't agree on what a market is, what needs are, and what segments are. I think that sums up the problem right there.
Yeah. These are already amazing pieces of maybe future lexicon to be written. Just jumping into a couple of things because we're going a little bit all over the place today because I have so many interesting things already here. How important is the process in innovation for you? Because I have worked, if we just giving you a little bit background, I've worked in a in the industry, and there are people who are saying like, we're creatives, we don't need a process, we follow the energy flow. Being German myself, for me, a process is important. What do you think about process versus not process?
Well, I mean, I think just like any other discipline in business, your ability to innovate is only as good as your innovation process, right? And so we're heavy on the process side as well. It is a process. It's the process of coming up with solutions that address unmet customer needs, right? And if there is no formal way to do that, then you're betting your company on a random occurrence or on hope, right? And hope's not a great strategy, right? I think by having a systematic process, you can further ensure your success, right? I know that the innovation success rates are generally somewhere in the, people debate this, but somewhere in the 5 to 20% range, where anywhere from 80-ish plus percent products fail. Well, they're failing because companies are following a poor process. And as I mentioned before, we've worked hard over the years to create an innovation process that would mitigate that risk of failure. And I think a lot of this starts by redefining some of those terms we had just talked about, Jens. And so if I could spend a minute doing that, I think a lot of the issue is the way people come at innovation. They come at it from an ideas first approach, where the goal is to come up with ideas and then go test them in the marketplace to see if they work. And if they don't, learn from customers and then go refine those ideas and solutions so that they go through the next iterative process, and then you take them back out to customers and see if they like them and so on. And that's part of it. The other part of it is, this ideas first approach leads companies to create idea databases where there's just thousands and thousands of ideas. And innovation management to them becomes the management of ideas, as opposed to an innovation process where you're trying to come up with solutions that address unmet needs. So I think that has taken people down the wrong path. Idea management is not innovation management, right? Innovation management is a science, right? It's the science of coming up with solutions that address unmet needs. And this is why understanding the customer's needs is so critical. As I mentioned, it's a rampant issue. Why don't people agree on what a need is? Well, because I think they're looking through the solutions lens, right? And you heard the quote, if we asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse, right? Yeah. Now, people often use that statement and walk away concluding, well, if that's true, then customers don't know what they want, right? That customers can't articulate their needs. Well, if that's true, why are you ever going to go talk to a customer and ask them about their needs, right? I know Steve Jobs came along a bit later and said, people don't know what they want until they see it. Well, that kind of reinforces that thinking, that, if people don't know what they want, let's just go come up with the ideas and then build what we think they want and go check it out with them. Well, that's not what either Henry Ford or Steve Jobs was saying. What they're saying is people don't know what solutions they want. They're not saying they don't understand their needs, but I think people are stuck in this ideas first solution mindset. And getting out of that mindset is absolutely key to success. So if you start laying this out, a mindset shift is big. And this is where the language and the mindset come into play. So you might have heard of the theory of jobs to be done, right? And it's the basic notion that people buy products to get a job done.
Yeah.
I think that's just an economic reality, right? It's been true for centuries. So if that's the case, why not start by creating products and services that get a job done better? And let's make the job itself the unit of analysis. You've also heard the quote, people don't want the quarter-inch drill, they want the quarter-inch hole, right? Yeah. Well, I think that gives us a nice option too. Instead of studying the drill, let's go study the process of creating the quarter-inch hole, because that's the job that people are trying to get done. Well, once you apply that unit of analysis to innovation, changes everything, right? Like we're going to look at everything from a different perspective, right? If we're not looking at it through the product lens, we're going to look at it through the jobs to be done lens. Now, when you do that, the definition of a market becomes much more obvious, right? So if people are buying products and services to get a job done, why wouldn't we define a market as a group of people and the job they're trying to get done? Now, if you do that, this opens a pathway to focus on this stable market that will be around for years, independent of solutions that come and go. If you look at the listening to music market, if you will, over the past decades, we've seen technology evolution from LPs to cassette tapes to CDs to streaming music. All they're very different technologies, but all designed to get the same job done. And I would argue that if you were a CD maker and you're studying how to make a better CD, you would have missed out on the opportunity to migrate it into the MP3 space, right? And if you're studying how to make a better MP3 player, then you're going to miss out on how to get into the stream services space and so on. And this is why it's so important to define your market around a stable unit of analysis. And this is what brings predictability to innovation. So instead of studying products, let's study the job the customer is trying to get done, right? This also helps in defining customer needs, right? If we know that we're trying to help customers get a job done better, why don't we define needs as the metrics that people use to measure success when getting a job done? That would make sense. And this really appeals to me, and again, it probably appeals to you in the sense that I tie this back to something I learned in the manufacturing space as an engineer back in my IBM days. Back then, of course, you'd use statistical process control to figure out where variation existed in the process, and you'd always try to figure out, what can I measure and control to produce a predictable output? It's a pretty common language that was used. Well, we're trying to do the same thing in the innovation space, except the job is the process that people are executing, and the metrics they're using to measure success are their needs. Right? So we're taking that same philosophy that you're still trying to figure out, what can I measure and control to produce a predictable output, and use those inputs to create a product. So now I can go to customers, ask them what job they're trying to get done, ask them what metrics they're using to measure success along each step of the way. And I can use those inputs as needs that help me figure out where in the job are people struggling for satisfaction, and where can I focus my attention to help them get the job done better.
So if we take this, for me, and I 100% agree, it sounds almost too simple. Because and you know this way better than you have worked with tremendous large organization in this world. If everyone would understand it and just execute and implement it, they would innovate like in a fast speed. Why is it not working in organization if we start specifically with the big ones?
Yeah, so I'd say we've covered a couple of these things, but just sum them up. The first thing is the mindset. It requires a mindset shift. People are definitely stuck in solution space. It's a tool set shift. Many of the tools that have been developed over the years to help in the innovation space are built with a solutions mindset. A lot of the research tools that help with paired comparisons and forced choice, and even conjoint analysis, they're really designed in solution space to help people choose between alternative solution options. Right? They're not designed to help figure out what the customer's needs are, which needs are unmet, and if there's segments of people with different unmet needs. So it requires a very different tool set. And most companies, because they have a ideas first mindset, they have an ideas first tool set. And that's just the way they do things. It's very hard to get them to see differently and then to invest in different tools to make it happen. And then the third is what you've already brought up, Jens, which was the process, where we talk to organizations just like you have that disagree that innovation is a process. They argue that trying to make it a process is the wrong way to go, that applying process to innovation somehow stifles creativity and innovation. So, if you think of the innovation process, you're actually killing your innovation efforts.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you think that, then you're fighting quite an uphill battle, right? So you're trying to change the mindset about what innovation is. You're trying to get people to think about it as a process, and change the tool set. And then, of course, you got the language issue as well, the language barrier.
Yeah.
So I think these are all the key contributors to why it's taken so long for companies to make this transition. I have to laugh because when I came up with this approach back in the early '90s, I thought, wow, as soon as people know about this, I'm going to be out of a job. Because like you said, it sounds simple, right? It does sound simple. We're just looking at things through a different lens and coming at it from a different angle. We have our own set of terms and our own process. But that hasn't happened, right? 30 years later, we're still trying to convince companies that innovation is a process. So there's still a long way to go. And like you said, it's an uphill battle. We're fighting a lot of ideas first thinking that's going to take time to overcome. But I do see it happening, right? Because companies who have applied this approach are very successful at it. Their innovation success rates increased by about 5 times. So it's worthwhile to change that mindset, to change the language. So I think a lot of companies recognize that. It's been a lot more talk in the last 5 years or so about jobs thinking and putting on this different lens and changing that mindset. So hopefully that will propel people to think a little bit about differently and act a little differently.
If you take this parts, so mindset, tool set, process, and language, and of course they're all important. What are the companies or the companies you have worked with or seen outside? What is the biggest lever in your experience from these ones?
That's great. I'd have to say it's mindset. Because if you don't have the mindset, you can't get the other 3, right? It's just, you're going to fight the process. You're going to fight the tool set. You're going to fight the language because it's not going to make sense to you because you can't think of innovation through a jobs to be done lens. You can only see it through a solution or ideas first or product lens. So that's really the key to success here. This is why we work really hard these days on trying to change that mindset.
Yeah.
I think that's the lever that stands in the way of success.
So if you work with, I mean, you do this, work with a Fortune 500 company, there tremendous amount of employees. There might be an innovation team which is like set to the side to work with innovation, and they might have already a little bit of that mindset. Where would you recommend organizations to start? Is it from the top? Is it in the innovation team? Is it from wherever? What is your experience, and what would be your recommendation?
Yeah, it's a great question. We've seen companies come at it from all different angles. It's hard, I'll say that up front. We've seen the top-down approach where companies try to force it. That generally doesn't work. We've seen a bottoms-up approach, which is more grassroots, which doesn't necessarily work either. What it takes is a combination of both. Right? So our best successes come in companies where at the highest levels, C-suite levels, they are pushing the program, right? They've learned about outcome-driven innovation. They understand the importance of getting the different mindset and tool set. They understand the importance of process. So they instill that in the organization and basically say, this is what you're going to go do, right? But that alone doesn't work, right? But there are always innovation champions in the organization that want to pilot ODI projects that want to apply this new thinking. So finding some of those groups and applying it, group by group, business unit by business unit, with top management support is really the way that we see companies succeeding at this. So again, there's probably 20 other variations of that, but I think that sums it up.
But I see your point, because in the end, we are all humans, and every organization has a slightly different organisms. So yes, you can use the process and say, okay, we start with mindset and try to give them the understanding of how important it is to start with it. But like, because we're humans inside the organization, there might be, hey, there's a middle management team, they get it, let's start with them and spread the internal virus into all the different directions. So
Yeah.
yeah, I see that.
Well, one thing that we see too, we work with a lot of companies that acquire other companies, and
Yeah.
as they acquire these companies, uh, which we talked with a firm just a couple of days ago, they, have acquired 5 different companies in the past few years, and they have 5 different innovation processes.
Mm.
So now they're trying to get everyone on the same page so that we can all, uh, you know, think consistently, because some of them are certainly better than others, right?
Yeah.
So you run into those issues as well. So again, I think starting with the mindset, getting everyone on the same page as to what innovation could be, is the key.
Yeah, and so then if we imagine the mindset is there, do you then take as the next lever the tool set, or straight away the process and say, hey, this is how we go and build innovation into the organization, or is it all happening at the same time?
Well, it's kind of happening at the same time.
Yeah.
They don't have to install the process yet, but they have to at least be open to trying the process, right?
Yeah.
So once they have the mindset, then they'll say, okay, I see there's a possible way. And then we, of course, introduce them to the outcome-driven innovation process. They recognize that why it's different and better. They recognize that it's worked for other companies, and they're open to trying it on their own. So at that point, they don't necessarily have to adopt the process. They have to test the process, right? And so we work with many companies to do exactly that with, a pilot or several pilots. And at that point, what they're learning is how to take data from this approach and how to create products and services that customers will want. Now, this is a bit complicated too. There's 2 ways. I say there's 2 different learning paths here. Companies often conflate learning how to do outcome-driven innovation with learning how to apply the findings. So in other words, the outcome-driven innovation process helps companies figure out their markets, uncover the customer's needs, figure out which are unmet, determine if there's segments of people with different unmet needs, and then use that information to create an innovation strategy that puts them on, like say, the most efficient path to growth, right? So they know what segments of the markets have different unmet needs, and they can plot a course to create the most value. In other words, what's the fewest number of things they can work on to create the most value for the biggest population. So we can help them with that. That's what the process produces. But then someone has to go take those inputs and say, okay, our goal is to go target that segment and those 15 unmet needs. Well, someone then has to learn how to go do that, right? They have to take that information and go create the product concept. They have to build the value proposition and so on. That's one of the difficult obstacles that companies have to overcome as well. It's not just learning how to do the process. It's learning how to take a different type of data and plugging it into your workflows. See, I would argue that companies are great at creating products. They're just not great at creating the right products. So everything after the development process, they're pretty good at. What they need is to make sure that they're only putting winning products into the development process. And so that's what we're focused on. And so it requires this mindset. It requires this tool set, right? So that they have the data that they need to go make the right decisions. And then, of course, they have to be able to use that data to make the right decisions. And I think those are the key elements of change that have to take place in order for companies to truly become innovation leaders.
If we take this, so you are an external company providing the service to an organization. How important is it to have an external entity, an external pairs of eyes in supporting you on this?
You mean their internal eyes, where they're? Oh, it's absolutely important, right? It's key. So there's got to be. I'll tell you a quick story. We're working with a company that from top down is is going to apply outcome-driven innovation. They're bought off on the mindset, the concept, and so on. And they're in the stage right now trying to find where to start. Right? And we've talked to a number of teams across the organization who don't want the help. Right? They know their space. They're comfortable.
Yeah.
And of course, that's not going to be a great starting point for a pilot, right? So I think it's really important to look across the organization and do one of two things. Either find a business unit or a product portfolio that's struggling and that needs the help in order to turn things around, or focus on an adjacent market where companies don't have the institutional knowledge where they feel like they know everything about the market and they're not willing to take a different approach to learn more.
Yeah.
So I think plugging it in either of those two situations is very helpful, and avoiding applying it to a company's core market right up front, because that's where they're most knowledgeable. That's probably where they get the least benefit, because clearly they're successful in that space already for some reason, so they've hit upon a formula, right? But it's repeating that's hard, right? How are they going to apply what they learned in that adjacent market, right? How come that market over here is struggling and they can't turn it around, right? The process is broken, so that's where they have more of a need. So applying it to those situations, I think, is the path to least resistance.
Yeah. So it's bringing that into the organization. How do you see it from bringing one team up to speed and they're really applying it? They're building their first successes, but then it's really the utmost goal is, of course, scaling that inside an organization. What are the tips and tricks you have learned in your career on helping an organization who is kind of, let's say, if we take one business unit which is doing it successful, and that's maybe in one specific country or in one specific part of one country or in the business, taking this up to the total organization?
Yep, great question. So when you've applied it at part of the organization, that organization that team doesn't necessarily know how to execute the ODI process.
Yeah.
Right? What they know is, as I explained before, they know how to take the data coming from the process and apply it correctly, and that's why they're successful. To scale it, you have to create a team of practitioners, people who can actually go define markets correctly and capture the needs and put the surveys out that will quantify them and do the segmentation analysis and create the innovation strategy. And that's all part of the innovation capability building work that we do. So we've seen a lot more of requests from that over the past 5-10 years or so. And that's where we spend a lot of our time and attention, is to figure out, well, how do we scale this and bring these teams up the learning curve fast enough where they can start contributing very quickly. So, we've created on-demand courses and workshops and things like that help with that aspect of this. And that's really, the critical aspect on the scaling side of things. Teaching people how to do it, supporting them as they do it, support them later on, help them when they're struggling with a complex project, those kinds of things.
Yeah, I love the word practitioners. If you have these practitioners, are they formed inside one group, or are they spread out inside the organization in the best case? And where would you place them inside the organization as well from a hierarchy perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question too. So again, we've seen this done in a number of different ways. We've seen it done where they're grouped together, like a corporate sponsored group has a dozen or so practitioners, and they hire them out to the business units on an as needed basis. That can work quite well. And it depends on how big the business units are as well. If the unique thing about outcome-driven innovation and jobs theory is that you could be in a business unit that has 10 products or more, but you're only addressing one customer job to be done, right? So quite literally, you can execute one project and inform the growth of 10 products, right? Your whole product portfolio. So that's a great way to leverage this. So in a situation like that, you probably wouldn't need your own internal practitioner at the business unit level.
Mm.
And so it depends how your organization is designed, right? We have other companies that have thousands of products, right? And clearly, they're not going to be asking Strategyn to do, their work for every product. So they have to learn how to do this themselves. And so if each business unit has 100 or so products or more, then teaching people at the business unit level how to go do this makes great sense.
Yeah.
So again, to summarize, if you have a bunch of business units, each of which have a handful of products, then doing it at the corporate level makes pretty good sense. But if you're structured in a way where your business units have lots of different products, doing it at the business unit level makes more sense.
Yeah. And I guess key part is as well that they communicate well with each other, even if they're not sitting at the same space, that they share the learnings, I guess.
Exactly, and we help them do exactly that. And the way we build up their capability, we provide support hours to teams, like a couple hours a week, where it's dedicated. Right, everyone gets on the phone, they ask their key questions, they learn from each other. We discuss best practices, we discuss improvements, all those types of things, so that we're not only helping them apply it, but improving it and fine tuning it for their organization.
Yeah. If we take this, so in my experience, when the pressure gets higher on the innovation practitioners, sometimes they are going to back to their old way of thinking, which is what they have learned over the last 10, 15, 20 years, depends how old they are. How do you prevent this in organizations?
Yeah, well, getting the right people to become practitioners is absolutely key, right?
Mm.
So then the question is, who fits the mold the best? A lot of this comes to mindset as well. You have to be able to think and see process. We'll say it like that. People buy products to get a job done. When you're talking to a customer about a product area, you're not seeing products. All you see is what the product's doing, right? You can look past solutions into problem space,
Mm.
right? And you can think of needs as the metrics that people use to measure success, and you can think of jobs as processes that can be broken down. And if you can do that, generally you're in pretty good shape. There's other skill sets too, of course. Being a full blown practitioner, and there's a few of them. You have to be able to facilitate engagements with your team.
Mm.
You have to be able to set up and conduct interviews with customers. You have to feel comfortable doing that and leading those sessions and gathering inputs, creating job maps, capturing outcome statements. You have to be good at putting together a survey and getting that fielded, and taking that information and analyzing it, and using programs like SPSS and so on to run cluster and factor analysis to analyze the data, and then pulling together all the findings to build the innovation strategy. Now, I've said a lot of different skill sets there. It's very rare that one individual has all those skills.
Yeah.
So as you're building out your practitioner team, you can have specialties, if you'd like, so that you have people that are really good at outcome gathering. You have others that are great at questionnaire development and strategy development, and so on. And so you can break out your team with different types of responsibilities, but you need to cover all those skill sets as you're putting together that practitioner team.
Yeah. One part is fueling that engine and getting or keeping the practitioners on board and helping them to grow further. How do you see the importance and ways of working with the executive management, specifically from a communication? Not all of them have been part of that. Most probably they're changing, at least in most organizations, every 3 to 5 to 6 years. But if they haven't been part of it, they might want to kind of change it and do something else which they have seen somewhere else. How do you support this part?
Yeah, and we've run into those issues as well. Yeah, you get a new a management change. They have their own ideas of how innovation should work, and it could change things quite dramatically. But the things you can't control are your success, right? It's hard to argue with success.
Yeah.
So the goal of the programs is to focus on markets that you can get that quick success. So we talked about this a bit earlier. If you can pilot a project around a troubled market that you're already in, and you can show turnaround within 6 months or a year or even 2 years, that's great, right? If your pilot's around a new market and it takes you 3 years to enter that new market, you know, the new CEO has no idea where that success came from or how it arrived. So that's going to be quite difficult. So, having some of these quick successes, I think, is very helpful in shaping the longevity of the use of the process, right?
Yeah.
And making it part of what the organization is and its culture.
But I guess to that part is also making it visible to the executive management that they understand it's not coming only from, let's say, the last end of the whole innovation process, which is, hey, there's a product that's working in the market.
Yeah.
They need to understand it's because of the process, I guess.
That's exactly right. And so what we often do is we have our executive education sessions where we explain the approach and how it works and how the program works and what we expect of them. And generally, what we expect of them is to just ask the right questions, right? So if someone comes to them and says, hey, we want to go invest in this product concept, well, ask them. Do you have evidence that it's going to get the job done better, and by how much, and what's it going to cost, and those kinds of things. So if they demand the data and the proof, and then that really helps to ensure that the organization is going to go get that data and apply the process so they can answer the questions and get approval for moving forward with their projects.
Yeah. How much do you see this as being packaged for the executive management or being transparent throughout?
Well, it's a little of each, I'd say. We're packaging it so that they are aware of what they need to do and what their role is in it. But throughout, they're given glimpses into successes and things like that. Because, innovation is interesting in the sense that, of course, we can go find the opportunities. In other words, we can find the unmet needs. That doesn't mean that the company is going to solve them.
Yeah.
They're going to try to solve them. Right. So one of the metrics that we have is, are we discovering hidden opportunities for growth? Right. So we can get measured against that. In other words, are we discovering unmet needs that would have gone undiscovered if we weren't using the process? And that's a really good metric because that's easier to show and it works. Right. I like to say this: that if there's an unmet need, we're going to find it. Right. But there is no guarantee that the company can satisfy it in the time frame it can satisfy it. So some of the actual market successes you may not see for years.
Yeah.
We work with many people in the medical device space where some of the product life cycles are 5 to 8 years. So, but the important thing there is they can't afford to get it wrong, right? If they miss out on a product cycle, they're going to be lacking revenue from that space for years to come. So they have to get it right. And companies like that we see are more open to innovation as a process because their long-term success really depends on it.
Yeah. Taking a turn, I mean, we have talked already, or you have mentioned already, the outcome-driven innovation process. I would like to highlight that a little bit more. So can you give an understanding and what you have developed and why it is so important for corporations?
Sure. So I'll go back to my IBM story. Like I said, the day after we introduced that product, the headlines read, "The PC Junior is a flop." Well, what occurred to me is, how did they know that, right? Like, how did they, and they had it right too. So it was clear to me that they were using some set of metrics to judge the value of the product. And only if we had known what they were 2 years ago, right? Or even a week ago, that would have been helpful. We could have maybe done something. But the thought was, there are metrics that people use to judge the value of a product. Are they knowable in advance of product development? And that set me down this path to say, well, if that's true, because clearly people are using some metrics. Where do they come from? And that's where jobs to be done thinking came in handy, right? Where you start looking at this through a little different lens and say, if we can study the process of creating the quarter-inch hole instead of asking people about how to create a better drill, then we can break it down as a process, and we can figure out what metrics they're using to judge getting the job done better. In essence, these are the metrics they're using to judge the value of the product, right? So bridging that together is the key to success, because what we're saying now is we can measure value creation because we know people are trying to get a job done better. We can measure better. Better means faster. It means more predictably. It means higher output throughput. We can put metrics in place for every one of those factors. And it can be applied to simple things too. Like we all cook meals, right? Are there measurable outcomes that you have when you cook a meal? Of course there are, right? You want to minimize the likelihood that you overcook the meal. You want to minimize the likelihood that you undercook the meal. You want to minimize the time it takes to clean up after the meal. There's measurable outcomes that you use and execute in every process. Now, these may not be top of mind on your consciousness as you're executing the job, but these statements are collectible from customers. They know them. They can articulate them. They may not know the best solutions. They're not going to recommend the microwave or invent it, right? But they do know that they have those outcomes associated with preparing a meal that are underserved. So understanding what those metrics are, figuring out which ones are unmet, discovering segments of people with different unmet needs is all part of the outcome-driven innovation process. And Jens, you mentioned this earlier. This sounds simple, and conceptually it is. All we're saying is define a market as a group of people getting a job done, define needs as the metrics they use to measure success, go quantify them to figure out which ones are unmet, and then determine if there's segments of people with different unmet needs. And with that input, that's going to inform so many activities downstream, including how to improve your current products, how to better position your current products, to fill gaps in your portfolio, to inform M&A and R&D investment decisions, to inform your digitalization strategy. And the reason that's true is because all those downstream activities are dependent on knowing where to go create value, right? And the organization exists to help companies get a job done better. And you're tying these metrics directly to what that means, right? So now you have this straight line set of metrics that say, if I focus on these in this order, I'm going to create the most value for my customer. And that's why I say, this puts you on the most efficient path to growth. That's what I mean by that, because you're always focused on the need that's most unmet to the largest customer population. And it's knowable. You can calculate it. We've been doing it for years, right? So I think that's the beauty of it. That's it in a nutshell.
Yeah. What I like about this specifically, maybe because I'm German, is you go from a feeling perspective into concrete, which means for me, it's thinking, it's process, it's tangible, and you can predict things going forward. It's not just, I believe that's a good idea, and maybe we will get the outcome.
Yes, exactly it. We flip it around the other way. What we say is,
exactly,
here's an unmet outcome. What idea can I have that will address it? And if you have an idea that addresses it, it's a good idea because it satisfies an unmet need, right? So we're not coming up with ideas in hopes and in the hope that it addresses an unmet need. We're understanding the unmet needs so we can systematically create a breakthrough solution.
Yeah. Talking about your books a little bit, so bringing us into the last part of the podcast interview. You have published books. Give us a little bit perspective. What can people learn from these books, and as well where they can find the outcome-driven innovation in more details to read through it or to connect with you and learn about it?
Sure. So the first book on the topic in detail is What Customers Want. So you can get this on Amazon. It was published through McGraw-Hill, so we can't give it away for free. But we did create a book in 2016 called Jobs to be Done, Theory to Practice, which you can get a free ebook download or free audiobook version of it as well at jobstobedonebook.com with all the hyphens in between, jobstobedonebook.com. So that's a great source of information that's free. Also, the Strategyn website. We've been revamping it, and we work on it constantly to bring the latest information and our learnings to our followers. So that's at strategyn.com. There's a jobs to be done page. There's an outcome-driven innovation page. There's a resources page. You can learn a lot from there. And there's also my Medium account as well that includes some of my more personal thoughts about innovation. And so it's not as formal, but maybe it's a little more fun. So that's available as well.
Yeah, super. And I, of course, we'll link that into the show notes so people can directly click through all the amazing content. Talking about things that are slightly disconnected to our conversation until now, if you could work with a project that is impacting every human being on Earth, what project would you decide to work with and why?
It's an amazing question, Jens, because I feel like I've done that. That's my life, because you're asking the question, what could I work on that would have impact across the world? And I think the answer is, if we can help people innovate more effectively and apply that innovation technique to all the different jobs that people are trying to get done, that's going to impact everybody. So I feel that that's probably the most direct approach to creating as much value as possible, not only for the companies producing the products, but for the people who are using the products as well. Right. So innovation affects everybody, right? We're enriching the lives of people through innovation. That means our Strategyn team members, of course, our clients, their customers, and that to me has brought me a lot of joy and reward over the years.
Next question. You seem like a lifelong learner, like maybe a lot of innovators. How do you keep yourself informed and learn about topics that interest you?
Well, thankfully, my feed on between LinkedIn, Twitter, everything else, of course, you get fed all the latest news in the innovation space and so on. So I generally spend about an hour a day going through all the latest thinking, so I can stay up to speed on what others are thinking about, and trying to learn how to take this process to the next level. So that's just part of the regular routine.
Looking ahead, what do you see coming in the next year as an innovator that some others might not see?
Well, what I'm hoping I see is that there's this final mindset shift. I've read years back that it takes 30 years to change the way organizations think, right? It's like a generation. And Jens, we're right there. It's been 30 years. And what I'm hoping to see is that it gets pushed over the edge. And 20 years from now, people sit back and go, why would anyone brainstorm ideas without knowing what the customer's needs are? And so I see that happening, right? Maybe it's more of a hope than a vision, but it works.
Yeah, great. Tony, we're approaching the end. How can people reach out to you? Where can people find you?
Well, they can contact Strategyn at info@strategyn.com. They could find me at Ulwick at strategyn.com. And they can follow me at Twitter at Ulwick.
Super. Did we forget anything?
I'm sure we did, but we'll never be able to think through what it is at the moment. Well, okay. 5 minutes from now, right?
Yeah, when we switch off the recording, we might just, we should have talked. No, I have still tons of questions open. Maybe we can do one day a second round and dive deeper into other topics. Was a pleasure having you on the show. I learned a lot, and I hope as well every listener learned a lot like I did. Thank you very much for spending the time with me, Tony.
Jens, it was my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to today's episode. You will find the links and resources in the show notes of this episode. If you would like to support the podcast, the most impactful thing you can do is subscribing to the show on any of the podcasting platforms and give me a review. This will help me to reach more innovators around the world and bring some of you into the show. If you have any question to the guest or want to engage with me, feel free to reach out to me on social media and contact me there.